Good morning, everyone. Todd Bush with Decarbonfuse. And so I handle a lot of the commercial and I'll say evaluation side of low carbon projects. So Decarbonfuse essentially offers kind of consulting around how to bring some low carbon products to market, as well as some other kind of self-service project tracking and basically market insights for anything kind of low carbon for the industrial side.
Let's see here. I'm Vince Marino. I'm the president of Empowering Pumps and Equipment. Uh, we are a digital media marketing company for the pumps and all rotating equipment. And we love pumps. And I want to just say welcome. Uh, I guess you could say I kind of did some research, which can be dangerous, in looking up what is sustainability? What is it, right? And I came up with a definition here. It's the practice of using resources in a way that allows them to be maintained for a long time without depletion. It's about creating and maintaining conditions that allow humans and nature to coexist in a way that supports current and future generations. Assuming you all agree with that statement, right? So uh, the one thing that came up is this thing about carbon and carbon capture. And I would like to kind of delve down into that a little bit too. And Todd, you've got the name of the company, Decarbonfuse, so maybe you can take the lead there and tell us a little bit about carbon. Why is carbon good or bad for us? And maybe you can share how that ties into the sustainability.
Yeah, exactly. So it's interesting. I kind of look at industrial decarbonization broadly, very connected to sustainability. So if you think of it in terms of anything from economic, environmental, social, even some on the technology side, you have this interlocking decarbonization efforts that help bring sustainability projects forward. So, for example, on the environmental side, a lot of the discussion has been around carbon capture for, being able to reduce emissions, being able to reduce kind of operational footprints. A lot of the projects that I end up working on are really around CO2 capture to be able to understand, can we utilize that for something, or can we store that somewhere to sequester it? And obviously that depends on kind of the end markets and if there's a premium. But sustainability in general, with decarbonization, I think is a way to kind of future-proof your company and bring new products to market. Got obviously focused on a lot of the low carbon fuels, low carbon products. Hopefully, if you can see this pretty well.
Sure.
I like pointing back to, because the industrial decarbonization topic is so big, and you start getting into sustainability drivers and trying to understand where you're going to actually, where as a company you're going to focus. Obviously, if you're building compressors, building pumps for energy efficient industrial processes, that's a great, I mean, you're already in line in kind of the scope one, scope two, scope three type of emissions projects that are going on at a lot of corporations. But I like pointing people back to the McKinsey study that's essentially this global energy decarbonization pathway, where they're looking at some of the, in this particular chart, some of the EU data, and how there's been an effort to focus on electrification, focus on energy efficiency, to reduce basically kind of CO2 and CO2 equivalent for a number of years. And then this basically takes that forward to 2050 to see what possible solutions could be explored for many industrial use cases. So we've already been talking about a handful of them, right? Electrification, circularity. I'll mention low carbon fuels, even lower footprints for operations, such that you're using less land, and you have a more modular approach to maybe constructing a facility, or even more modular approach to different pieces of equipment. And then lastly, kind of carbon capture. And I tend to focus a lot of my time on the low carbon fuel side and as well as carbon capture. And as you start looking at these other industry segments, so whether you're thinking about ammonia or ethanol or hydrogen or even natural gas in this case, the cost of CO2 capture, I'd say, varies pretty widely depending on the total volumes of CO2 that are out there and the individual facilities and what they're producing. And so this chart just gives you a little bit of a view of each segment, and each dot kind of represents a facility. And the line that's going across is the Inflation Reduction Act, $85 a ton, where they're basically saying for capturing CO2 and sequestering it, you get $85. For capturing CO2 and utilizing it, you would get basically $60 a ton. But I'm just using $85 a ton here to illustrate that many of the facilities across, whether that could be a blue ammonia product that comes to market, or a low carbon ethanol kind of gasoline additive that comes to market, both of those are well under that $85 a ton. And then as you get into kind of hydrogen facilities and natural gas emitters, so all of these are, I should say, all of these are facilities in North America. There are a number of hydrogen and natural gas emitters that are above the $85 a ton, so kind of implying those are outside of the money and would be difficult projects to do, but still many facilities that are below that kind of black line that could capture the CO2, create call it a low carbon product or a more sustainable product that can be brought to market for, in some cases, a premium. In other cases, it depends kind of where that market is, where that product is being sold. But for example, you have a lot of initiatives happening right now in the hydrogen space that are looking at providing blue ammonia, and that would be ammonia that you've captured the CO2 from, similar to hydrogen, where you have kind of blue hydrogen. You're capturing the CO2 and sequestering it, and then selling that hydrogen. So there's a number of kind of opportunities, individual facilities where you can capture that CO2 and basically begin bringing a low carbon product to market.
Interesting.
Really good points on kind of the life cycle side. And we're starting to see more of that life cycle analysis come into play from both the power perspective as well as individual products and equipment and individual facilities. And take, for example, in talking to power companies that are looking at different generation techniques. So they're obviously thinking about renewables and evaluating renewables, also evaluating what happens if they could capture the CO2 off of a maybe like a combined cycle type of plant, and what they could then do with those emissions if they're able to capture them and reuse them. So things like generating power, but capturing the CO2 and reusing it for synthetic gasoline. There's very interesting technology out there that's coming into play where you have lower carbon products, and basically, if you think of it in terms of life cycle analysis or carbon intensity, either one of those, sometimes they're used interchangeably, but you start thinking of all the CO2 reuse opportunities where you start creating synthetic products from CO2 to be able to reuse in our existing infrastructure. So, for example, if you have a car that's running on gasoline, then have an option for lower carbon gasoline. And some states in the U.S. and Canada are rewarding kind of synthetic or lower carbon intensity gasoline for some producers. So I think we're at the very early stages of this, especially as more and more companies are starting to evaluate, okay, what can I do in my operations? What can I do for buying power? Can I buy lower carbon power? And then, of course, kind of that the downstream impact. So where am I where am I going to be evaluating my product or equipment in another situation that has impact on the buyer's kind of carbon intensity. So I think it's an exciting time and one where every industry and every company are kind of taking steps in different ways to get there. And that's one of the pieces to me, at least, that makes it challenging, but also exciting.
Excellent. If you could just give us a flyover of what you and your company does, I think it might be time for a little bit of a commercial break, and let's hear what Todd's all about because he's got some interesting graphs here.
Yeah, let me the slide. Um, So Decarbonfuse basically mentioned earlier, low carbon advisory and intelligence. We'll work with power companies, oil and gas, say generally asset owners. That could be ethanol producers, ammonia producers as well, along with any of those investors. And we started essentially about 5 years ago looking at emissions-based intensity for oil and gas, kind of various oil and gas equipment. And so a lot of that revolved around hydraulic horsepower and looking how companies were making a change to electrified pumps and electrified fleets. And so just maybe sharing an anecdote here, probably when we started um, out of, call it maybe 200, 290, 300 frac fleets that were out in oil and gas that were active. There were probably 3% that were right, essentially were e-fleets and that had electrification, kind of complete electrification in the field. As as that moved from kind of 2020 till now, you're probably looking at about 40 to 50% of those fleets are electrified. And so that's one area that doesn't get talked about a lot, but the oil field service companies and the pressure pumpers have had to have a focus on sustainability and reducing emissions and electrifying the equipment. And they've done that going from, call it, anywhere between 20 to 22 pumps on site, and these are frac pumps, down to usually about 12 or 14 frac pumps on site. So it's been a pretty much a transformation for that industry. And all that emissions work that we did there, we started taking that into, well, if we're saving some of those emissions and reducing others, or maybe capturing emissions, then what can we do for the emissions side, and how do we use that? I'm going to flip through a couple slides real quick to get to one in particular. But so as we were thinking about those emissions and where they're coming from, whether that's coming, maybe low volumes off a compressor or high volumes, high purity coming from a ammonia facility or even an ethanol facility, then characterizing that so you get an idea of, oh, you can create a new product out of it, or you can evaluate the sequestration of it, um, assessing kind of the transport side of this. So often there's a CO2 transportation element, which if you're in the US and Canada, there's already some CO2 demand from kind of the beverage industry and other markets. But right now, there's a lot of projects that are looking at, I'll call it, using renewable energy and using CO2 to create some e-fuel and other kind of CO2 byproducts out of that. And then after kind of assessing that transport, then plan the wells and facilities, depending on if you're going the sequestration or the utilization routes. And really all along, you're kind of doing stakeholder engagement and building the economics so that you can understand what these projects take and what type of impact they're going to have on the kind of stakeholder community. So if you've watched any or heard of any of these larger CO2 utilization projects or even storage projects, many of them often face some, I'll say, headwinds from the stakeholder side to make sure that there is the community is actively engaged. They understand what's going on at that individual industrial facility, and then what's going to happen to that CO2 as it's either transported through or sequestered nearby. So those are all kind of considerations that you have to take as you start thinking about the either reducing the emissions or reusing them in some way. And so I just like using that as an example of kind of how you go through kind of that entire process from a call it a market participation side, as well as just thinking about what else you can do with those emission reductions and how that translates to new products or even winning new business because you are taking into account the entire life cycle approach.
You know, the beauty of this is everything you just pointed to, pumps are associated with that, virtually everything, which is, I mean, from water to gases to liquefied gas, all of that is it's fascinating. You mentioned CO2 into alternative energy. Is that right? Did I hear that correctly?
Yeah, so I have really kind of synthetic kind of products. So like CO2 taking some companies taking CO2 and creating other synthetic products like a synthetic gasoline or even a CO2 to propylene, which is another chemical that's used often in the chemical industry and as an input to other products. So you start thinking of how to reduce the reliance on petroleum-based products and use CO2-based products, it becomes kind of that's a whole kind of web of product replacement that's possible, but right now we're still kind of at the early stages of it.
I see. Okay. Well, I know one thing's for sure, water and good stewardship with water is one of the most basic fundamentals. I mean, we need water to live.
I'm seeing on the carbon intensity scores becoming more and more prevalent across whether that is a equipment supplier or compressor or anything that's going to be used in a process that could impact kind of an end product CI score. So whether that's, if you think of it, we'll do a lot around scope one kind of emissions, which are direct kind of from the operations. Scope two is your power side and what you can do for power, and scope three is more the supply chain and kind of downstream impacts. But seeing that CI score across so many industries right now where it made sense for, let's call it ethanol and ammonia and hydrogen for quite some time because they were selling into a market that required it. But now you have all of the people that are working with those industries also calculating their CI scores for their individual products so that they can show that benefit not only from a selling side, but also kind of a sustainability side.
Kind of what is your company? What's it all about? And how can it help folks that are looking here?
Decarbonfuse, and we offer low carbon intelligence and advisory for, I'll say, all types of industrial firms. Many of those are energy producers, could be gasoline producers, and even moves into some of the chemical industry as well. And essentially what we help do from a consulting side is bring new projects to market. So that could be new types of CO2 utilization projects, could be CO2 sequestration projects, even evaluating carbon capture for power. And we'll like to come in from I'll say a project perspective and look at individual facilities to understand what facilities are around, where those CO2 sources are, and how we can take the existing kind of CO2 and do something with it. So often that means characterizing the emissions, understanding what's happening from an individual facility side to make that CO2 economic in some way. So like I said, most of those projects are CO2 utilization and carbon capture focused. Now, we do offer some tools for individuals that are in kind of looking at decarbonization more broadly. And those are kind of our Decarbonfuse platform where we have a view where you can see what's happening in kind of hydrogen industry or blue ammonia, even ethanol, and be able to take what what that looks like from a kind of carbon capture and CO2 utilization standpoint. And
Now we're
then,
looking at, I'm showing off your main page there for a
oh yeah,
second.
perfect, perfect.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead and if you want to switch to it and do a a deeper dive, that's fine. I don't have all the passwords like you do, just the
Yeah,
main page, but it
yeah.
is some
So
kind of a repository for a lot of information regarding carbon capture, and
yes. So, one moment, because well, I don't actually have that up right now, but I can tell you it's basically kind of all the sources, and I can show at least a quick little
uh,
uh, on what that looks like. But essentially, we'll end up um, taking all of the emission sources across North America, looking at those from kind of an industry perspective, seeing where you could utilize those, where some kind of buyers might be from the CO2 standpoint, and then from a sequestration side, where the pipelines are, CO2 pipelines are, as well as any storage facility. So we like kind of taking that kind of broad view from the emission standpoint to then understand, what else you can do with the CO2, and work with a lot of different companies around carbon capture. And this just kind of gives you a view of companies that are either subscribers on the Decarbonfuse side or have participated in research or our individual kind of consulting projects. So from the capture standpoint, there's a lot of CO2 technology companies that we've worked with that really dig deep on, what type of amines are best for um, kind of different CO2 sources. Then getting into kind of the transport side, typically those are more on midstream kind of pipeline companies that are getting into CO2, but we have done a handful of rail and trucking for CO2. And then from a utilization standpoint, there's many different companies that are taking CO2 and putting it into products. So maybe that's CO2 to sustainable aviation fuel, or CO2 to cement, or CO2 to some type of chemical. And then the other piece to that is the storage side, where you have a lot of either former oil and gas companies or project developers that are looking at sequestration. And then companies that are kind of supporting all across, whether that's the EPCs that were brought up, um, really tackling kind of the build out for the CO2 facilities or build out for any of the midstream facilities, and then other services that are required, whether those are compressors, equipment, pumps, steel, even now getting into kind of chrome steel for some of the sequestration side. So a lot of interesting kind of connections to different industries and different companies.
well, thank you for that. I don't know if we can solve all the problems regarding sustainability today, but this is certainly a first step in the right direction. Uh, Todd, you got anything to add?
No, I would just say in closing, one thing that I've been doing is talking to several kind of local universities and also kind of preparing my son for college and everything else. And I think the future of kind of energy, the future of so many industrial applications involve sustainability and being able to deliver kind of low carbon products. And that's one thing that you can see throughout kind of my work, especially over the last 5 years, and then being able to take that and transform it into something that has direct value, because that's one of the arguments that I hear often kind of working with either power producers or even oil and gas or oilfield service companies. And once you can show that value associated to sustainability, I think it becomes even more clear and um, more about not just the right thing to do, but there's economic benefit, there's technology benefit, and you can see sustainability move throughout a company like that.